Good evening, welcome to Central News for Wednesday the 25th of September. I'm Hilary Entwistle. It is the third night of our Mayoralty Candidate Special and tonight it is the Waipa District. Nestled in the Waikato, the Waipa District's estimated population at June 2012 was 46,200, of which 35% resided in the two main towns, Cambridge and Te Awamutu. Current Mayor Alan Livingston is stepping down and running for Regional Council. The candidates are James Parlane, Patrick Bishop, Dennis Finn and Jim Milcrest. Unfortunately, James Parlane could not be with us tonight for some unknown reason, and Patrick Bishop could not make the scheduled time as he had an appointment in Auckland, but we wish them both the best for their campaign. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Right, to start off, if you could each tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to run for mayor. The catch is you've got a minute each and you have to state on the time. Let's start off with you, Dennis.
My name's Dennis Finn, standing for the Mayoralty of Waipa. I am a current councillor on a council. In my professional background, I work in the education sector. I support boards of trustees to understand their roles and responsibilities. I give guidance, support and advice in that area. In a more formal sense, I fill the role of a commissioner in schools and have managed 24 of those, 25 in fact, of those interventions, and support communities to get over significant issues. When I look at the role of the mayor, in a positive environment, it is to do exactly the work I do, to support communities, to support the council, to understand what it is that they have got to do, how they should know and understand the issues in front of them. Some of them are complex. So in that sense, I bring that level of expertise to the council table, and as mayor, I would give the leadership to council to undertake their role and to the community in recognition of the significant amount of contribution that comes from within.
And Jim, why would you like to be mayor?
Jim Milcrest. Certainly I've lived most of my life in the Waipa district, married to Robin, and we have 5 children that have all grown up in Waipa. I'm a long-term employee of the district and previously the Waipa County Councils, so I've spent most of my working career working within the organisation, so I've got a thorough understanding of the background workings, I suppose. I left the employment of the District Council about 10 years ago now to take up employment as Chief Executive of the Mangatautari Ecological Island Trust, and I was there for seven and a bit years, and since then I've been either in my own consultancy work and just recently been re-employed by the council as their property manager. So I think that I've got a good grounding and background in what the roles and responsibilities of the council are. With the children, obviously, I've been actively involved in the community. I was chairperson of the Board of Trustees for Te Awamutu College for 11 years of the 12 years I was on the board. So I've got that governance experience. So I suppose in a similar way to Dennis, I've got an education background from a governance perspective anyway. So basically I wanted to put my name in the ring just so that we can give back a little bit to the community that's provided so much to myself and the family over those years. So I can see a great future for Waipa District. It's certainly a great place to live. It's one of those places that is very privileged, I suppose, to still be having a significant growth. And that makes solving a lot of the issues and challenges a lot easier.
Well, thank you very much. Now, stay tuned, as up next we talk rates and debt. Welcome back to Central News. We are bringing you our Mayoralty Special, and tonight is the Waipa District Night. An issue for some councils all over the country is debt. Dennis, will you address the debt of Waipa Council if you were elected as mayor?
So Waipa does have a debt, but that debt doesn't worry me as a councillor. We've just had the auditors in. They've taken a thorough look at it. They've said to us that our debt is a lot lower than many councils throughout the country. all councils have to have a level of debt. There is intergenerational equity with much of our capital expenditure. So through that process, we cover debt. Our debt sits at about 70% of our rate take, not our total income, 70%. It'll end up in that position, about 35 million at the end of this year. And I think that's a reasonable level of debt. I have no issue with that. I think it's quite appropriate. We have some challenges ahead, and it is going to grow. But at the end of the day, when you consider that increase in debt, it's sitting well below our threshold of 10% of total income, rates plus our fees and charges. It's sitting at about 6.5% at its highest level and then dropping back down. So I'm actually not concerned about debt. We are managing that debt well within the threshold that's allowed, and I'm satisfied with that level.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of the debt, and Dennis has certainly covered it, from Waipa's perspective, with the growth that we've got in the district, the level of debt has been confirmed, I suppose, from external sources, the audit, that the level of debt for Waipa is not a significant issue. And it's very easy for people to pick on debt as a problem, and it certainly is within some local bodies. But of course, the moment they are accused of having too high a level of debt, then all of a sudden all debt is bad. And that is not the case with Waipa. We've, as Dennis has said, there's about $23 million of debt at the moment, and that'll rise to about, at the maximum within the 10-year plan, of about $70 million, which is only about 6.5%. The repayment of that debt's only about 6.5% of the income, as Dennis has mentioned, 6.5 to 7%. So it's completely within the budget constraints, I suppose, of a rational thinking body. So debt is not an issue for Waipa. As I said, we have the growth. And from a council perspective, a lot of our projects go for many generations. You know, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years for some of the projects that we're looking at, improvements to water supplies. So it's a means of making it fair and equitable that everybody should pay their share of those facilities, whether it be a water supply or a new swimming pool. At a certain stage, you have to build quite a significant new capacity into the infrastructure, and it may appear that it's way over design, but we are looking multi-generations out into the future. So covering that with debt is not an irrational thing to do. So it's just understanding the scale of the situation, and I try to explain it to people. If you actually took our $23 million worth of debt for Waipa, and that sounds like a huge number, but you divide it by the number of properties just to give you a crude feel of how much debt that is per property, and it works out at about $1,500 per property. So it's insignificant really in terms of you know the liability, I suppose, that ratepayers should be feeling uncomfortable with. So I certainly support Dennis in terms of that.
Well, I mean, that's one of the lowest rates of debt that I've heard of possibly in the region. That's amazing.
Well,
so,
we realise that, though. We understand that.
But why has that debt been great? You know, why is the Waipa Council doing well?
Well, it's the growth within the district. It's a very attractive place for people to live. And I suppose very fortunate in that it relies heavily on the dairy industry and the bloodstock industries. So, you know, we are cushioned from a lot of the downturn that a lot of rural New Zealand is suffering. We're also on the boundary of Hamilton City, so we have a dormitory effect both in Te Awamutu and Cambridge. So they're both popular towns. They've probably got the fastest growth of any small towns in the country. So with that growth, you can then afford to repay that debt as people develop sections, pay reserve contributions and things like that. So servicing the debt is not an issue, plus the fact that we are in that very privileged position to be in a wealthy area, I suppose.
Why do you think the debt?
Well, I'd just add to the conversation that's already taken place. I have to say that I think Council has managed the exercise of delivering our services and our capital expenditure in a very effective and efficient way. I advocate for that to continue. It's absolutely important that everybody sees that we are getting good value for the dollar. That's happening. And there's nothing for people to feel uncomfortable about as far as Waipa is concerned. Nothing whatsoever. The level of debt is perfectly affordable and appropriate.
Well, thank you very much. Sounds like some councils could take a lesson from Waipa. Coming up next, amalgamation. Welcome back to Central News on TV Central with our Waipa District Mayoralty candidates, Dennis Finn and Jim Milchrist. Now, amalgamation of councils in the Waikato seems to be a very topical issue. Jim, do you support amalgamation in Waikato?
No, not based on the information that we have available. And certainly that's based on a Waipa perspective, and I suppose that's because of the strength that Waipa has. But I don't believe necessarily that big is best, and I think that maintaining a community's identity is important. So I think that there are definitely ways of getting efficiencies by working together, but I don't believe that there is necessarily an advantage, at least to Waipa, in some form of amalgamation. So there are already processes underway, and Dennis will probably touch on those, being an existing councillor in terms of the mayoral forum, and I'll leave that to Dennis to talk about. But as I say, from a personal perspective, I think that Waipa is big enough to go it alone. It may actually have to talk to its neighbours, some of the smaller ones, as not a forced amalgamation, but more cooperation. But yes, I certainly don't support amalgamation.
Do you support amalgamation, Dennis?
No, I don't. Not at this stage. And that's based on the type of district we are as Waipa and the type of district that surrounds us. It's clearly a rural area, as we well know. And the satellite towns that are amongst the district provide the services necessary. The Property Council has fostered the idea of a super city type model in the Waikato, attended the meeting that took place in Hamilton, but I don't see any synergies there with the Auckland model, which they tend to be basing it off. Quite frankly, as I said, we're a rural area. If we amass the population that lives within that Waikato bigger area, we're looking at about 400,000. How can we make a comparison there with 1.5 million in Auckland? How can we make a comparison between the rural areas that exist within the Waikato compared to the urban areas that make up Auckland? The synergies aren't there. I agree with what Jim's just said in terms of Waipa standing alone at this present time. We have positive role growth indicated out to 2031 and beyond, in actual fact. So we're a growing district, unlike a number of districts in the Waikato who will have negative population growth. So in that regard, we're in a pretty strong position moving forward. I'm more focused on the mayoral forum. The mayoral forum is all about developing efficiencies in the way in which we operate, and also about looking at the best way in which we can contract our services out, either as a cluster or a group of councils, so that we get better bang for bucks. And that's a way in which we can currently, right now, affect significant savings. We haven't got the detail of that yet. It's in the making. There's 4 strands being investigated and looked at, and there's a lot of work happening, and that will come to fruition over time. And when we get that, we're expecting to see the ability to be able to offer services amongst the councils, look at the contractual obligations and see if we can get significant savings from a larger type contract and benefit that way each council.
Say amalgamation does happen during the term that you're mayor. how do you ensure that Waipa still has a loud, clear voice?
Well, that's a real difficulty because in a democratic situation, there's one person, one vote. And if you are only a minority within any reorganisation scheme, then you struggle to have that voice. And that's one of the issues, really, and one of the reasons that I don't support amalgamation, because you would, or Waipa would have difficulty being a minority in a much bigger mix. So it's only by being able to establish that Waipa is able to sustain itself in the long term, it's big enough to be effective and efficient, and providing that evidence to the powers that be, I suppose, that are going to make the decisions whether to force an amalgamation through.
And if amalgamation did happen in your term, how would you ensure that Waipa had that voice?
Well, actually, Waipa wouldn't have the voice. The collective council would have the voice. So Waipa sort of loses that. But I have to say that amalgamation will certainly be on the table for discussion. It is now, and you raised the point. But I feel for councillors to the south of us. They've got large areas, small populations, 10,000 people. That's a difficult situation, and there may be some synergies or talking that needs to take place in terms of how Waipa, and in fact we have given support through our operational work in the past. So I think that we're far better right at this moment to look at ways in which we can work collaboratively together to save costs. We maintain our identity, we maintain the individuality, but we also are working to the benefit of the ratepayer by gaining significant savings, if the homework comes to that, and we suspect it certainly will.
Well, thank you very much. Now, stay tuned, as up next we put your questions to the mayors. Welcome back to Central News and our Merity Candidate Special with some of the Waipa District Council candidates. We have asked our viewers to send us questions of what they want to know from their potential new mayor. Now, this one comes from a Cambridge resident who said Cambridge has some beautiful heritage buildings, but as the Waipa District Mayor, what will you do to help those property owners comply with new earthquake standards, Dennis?
Well, we'd have to look at that pretty closely. Obviously, yes, there are heritage buildings in Cambridge. They are to be protected. They are to be looked after and cherished as an asset within the community. So we'd have to look at that closely and obviously make some move to support or whatever the changes needed to make sure they're up to standard. Now, if they're council-owned properties, obviously council's got that obligation. If they're privately owned properties, that's a different story, and we'd have to look at that closely. But the commitment would be there on my part to make sure that we were talking to the community and understanding the needs, what's got to happen in terms of moving forward to protect those buildings for the long term.
Yes, from a heritage perspective, the amenity value, I suppose, in Cambridge and even in Te Awamutu, there are a number of heritage buildings. It's a major issue, and it's going to be difficult for council to handle because a recent report has estimated that there's probably going to be about $3 million worth of cost just to inspect all of the buildings within Waipa over the next 5 years, and potentially a cost of about $125 million to actually repair or make strong those buildings that are identified with faults. So there's a huge cost that owners of buildings, that's council and the community, are going to be facing in the next 5 to 15 years as the requirements of the new earthquake standards kick in. So I think there's probably still going to be quite a lot of debate really over the speed and how much work has to be done. But as Dennis has said, it's if the community has said that they want to protect those buildings and they have to be made safe, then the community may well have to pick up the tag. Otherwise, the individual owners have got an option if they haven't been registered as under the Historic Places Trust. I suppose they've got the option of pulling them down rather than fixing them. So from a personal perspective, if the community say that they want those buildings, then the community probably have to start thinking about how much they want those buildings and how much they're prepared to pay. So it's going to be a challenging period of time, and I think probably it will come to the fore a lot quicker than the legislative requirements, because as I understand it, the insurance industry is already saying they won't insure buildings unless they are earthquake safe. So that may actually drive the repairs.
I'm going to have to stop you there, sorry, we'll run out of time for that section of that question. The next question that's come to us was a ratepayer who said, I wasn't happy with my rates going towards the Avantidrome. Do you support the Avantidrome?
I certainly do. I was part of bringing it, bringing council's contribution to it. I'd have to say right now that there's a huge change within the community in terms of the advantage of the Avantidrome coming to Cambridge. Yes, people did have concern, and yes, people still have some concerns, but there's been a big shift. And when people see it appearing and happening and taking shape, when the Avantidrome, the Trust Chief Executive is moving around the community explaining how it will work, showing that there's the opportunity for people to be able to enjoy and use it as well as those top sports people, people's mind is, people's views are shifting. Now, that's a big plus, and I think it's a wonderful asset to come to Waipa, and it was well challenged.
Yeah, look, the short answer, yes, I support the Avantidrome. Realistically, to get an investment of $28 million in the Waipa district for a $1 million contribution is fantastic business sense. And as Dennis has said, it is attracting people into the district, and for work and even just simple terms, the construction work that's been required. So yes, I'm a supporter of that investment. I think it was a very, very good move on behalf of council. And I acknowledge that there are a lot of people that are opposed to it, and there's people opposed to the swimming pool, they're opposed to the library. It depends on what stage of their life they're in, what facilities they're using, and that's understandable. But I think the council needs to get all of the information and make a considered decision on when it does pursue these sorts of projects. But in short, yes, I support that.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our show for the Waipa District Council Mayoralty Candidate Special. Thank you very much to Dennis Finn and Jim Milchrist for coming along tonight. Don't forget, tomorrow night we will have Hamilton City Council candidates in and be putting more questions to your potential mayor. You will be able to watch this episode again if you wish to on our website, tvcentral.co.nz. I'm Hilary Entwistle. Have a lovely evening, and remember, you can vote at any time from now to October the 12th.
This has been an Alpha Media production, a division of Television Media Group.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.